Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the dim air of ancient Egypt, where the Nile breathes a soft mist and the mud brick walls of the village still hold the cool of night. You shuffle awake on a reed mat, groggy, half dreaming of dates and figs. But reality calls with the faint smell of yesterday's bread that has already gone dry and crumbly. No alarm clocks, no phone buzzing, just the faint creak of a wooden hinge as someone next door slides open a courtyard door. You're not surviving this era without carbs, and trust me, you probably won't survive this cornstone workout either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there, because bread waits for no one, whether it's 2 a.m. in Chicago or dusk in Jakarta. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rise before the sun does, brushing grit from your sandals, stepping out into a courtyard where the ground is still damp from last night's irrigation run. The Nile is only a few fields away, wide and dark, its water carrying the hush of silt and reeds. A heron croaks once, annoyed you've disturbed its fishing. You crouch by a low shelf, lifting yesterday's conical molds, tapping them to free. Whatever sand clung to their sides, fine grit slides down like hourglass dust, sticking to your palms. Egyptians baked in clay molds and every morning began with this same tedious task, making sure nothing gritty lingered from yesterday because nobody wants to bite into a loaf and chip a tooth. Next comes the leaven jar, resting in the corner, where warmth lingers. You open the lid and wince at the sour tang that wafts up. The starter lives, bubbling faintly, a tiny swamp of life that somehow keeps everyone fed. Historians still argue whether these bakers truly understood fermentation or just trusted the magic bubbles to return each day. Either way, you check its surface, scrape off the dry crust, and nod in relief. It survived the night. No starter, no bread, no workers building pyramids, no offerings for temples. You've never been so grateful for something that looks like mud. Your first chore is measuring out emmer wheat, the backbone of Egyptian bread. You scoop from a woven basket, running fingers through the grains, hearing the faint rattle of husks. Emmer isn't modern wheat. It's stubborn, tough, wrapped in husks that cling tighter than gossip in the marketplace. Later, you'll grind it down to flour, but for now, you're just counting, making sure enough is ready for the day's quota. Bread wasn't personal. Most loaves went straight to workers or temples. Bakers were more accountants than chefs, ticking off batches, making sure quotas matched. The courtyard still holds silence, broken only by a rooster with questionable timing. Your neighbor mutters, dropping a mold that cracks against stone. You roll your eyes because now you'll have to share your own molds later, and sharing in this business is like lending someone your toothbrush. Necessary, but slightly gross. You shuffle the molds into tidy stacks, each one looking like a miniature beehive, rounded and dark from countless firings. The smell of clay dust lingers on your fingertips. Some molds are chipped. You'll patch them with wet mud later, pressing the clay back together like fixing a cracked mug. Egyptians rarely threw things out. Tools lived longer than people's patience. With molds cleaned, grain counted, and leaven checked, you pause at the threshold of your courtyard. Beyond, the horizon is just beginning to pale. In the distance, palm tops catch the first faint line of gold. You hear the Nile's lap against the bank, soft as a lullaby. Somewhere, a temple gong resonates once, calling priests to their own routines. You smirk, whether it's gods or bakers. Everyone starts the day before dawn. The tasks are small, repetitive, almost boring. Clean this, count that, scrape a little mold, chase away a hen. But together, they're survival. Bread isn't glamorous. It doesn't earn you fame. Yet each little job keeps the giant machine of Egypt moving. It's like being the world's least celebrated gear in the grandest clock. a gear that, if it slips, means 1,000 hungry laborers complaining that their rations are late. You reach for a damp cloth, wiping yesterday's soot off your hands. You take one last glance at the sour jar, its bubbles faint but steady. You nod. It feels like a pact. You care for it, and it keeps you fed. Quiet chores, done without ceremony, yet somehow monumental, because without them, the empire would starve before the sun even rose. The air thickens as the first glow spills over the Nile, and you heft the upper stone of the quern onto its base. This is the sound that wakes the street, not birdsong, not temple bells, but the gritty rasp of stone on stone. You kneel, awkwardly bent, feeding a handful of emmer into the hollow, pushing the top stone back and forth with a grinding groan. Dust puffs up, coating your forearms, your nose, even your eyelashes. Within minutes, you're already sweating. No wonder Egyptian bakers had biceps like blacksmiths. This is less quiet craft and more ancient CrossFit. The street outside begins to stir. Neighbors cough the night from their throats. A donkey brays as if insulted by sunrise, and children shuffle to fetch water jars. You keep grinding, steady as a metronome. Historians still argue whether families ground their own grain or relied mostly on communal mills, but either way, the morning soundtrack was the same: stone on stone, huff of breath, thud of husk. A friend passes by, balancing a basket of barley, and leans in with a grin. "Dust looks good on you," he jokes, and you reply with a half-hearted glare, spitting out a husk that's lodged itself between your teeth. Humor is the only thing keeping people sane in this dust storm of a job. You'll later sweep up the bran and feed it to animals, or if the day runs lean, mix a little bakum into loaves for bulk. Everyone swears they can taste the difference, though you suspect most of it is psychological. Soon the street is alive with its own rhythm. Donkeys are harnessed to a large rotary mill in a nearby courtyard, plodding in endless circles. You glance over and almost envy them. 4 hooves, no complaints, and they'll never be asked to carve batch tallies. Still, the ash-flecked beasts shake their ears miserably, dust clinging to their coats. You can't decide if you're luckier with your small quern, or if the donkeys have it easier, oblivious to everything except circles. You pause for a sip from a water jar, the clay cool against your lips, the taste faintly earthy. Your throat is dry already, clogged with invisible clouds of flour. You glance down at the pile you've made, a small mound of coarse flour, nowhere near enough yet. Bakers were measured by output, not artistry. Your arms ache, but the day has barely started. You think about pyramids rising on the horizon and wonder how many stones are lifted per loaf you grind. Probably more than you want to know. A quirky little fact crosses your mind. Egyptians sometimes mixed ground charred barley into loaves, making a sort of smoky bread. Some say it was for flavor, others that it masked spoilage. Either way, it means you could burn your grain and still claim it was intentional. A handy trick. File it under culinary lies that work. As you continue grinding, the chatter of neighbors carries over. Someone argues about the price of onions in the market. Another complains that their mold's cracked from last night's. Firing, the gossip weaves into the rhythm of the mill like a chorus layered over percussion. You let it wash over you, part of the background. The city wakes slowly, like dough swelling under a cloth, rising with the heat of the day. By now, the horizon is streaked orange, and you've filled a woven tray with flour. Your knees protest, your shoulders feel like stone themselves, but the sight of that pale mound makes it worthwhile. Bread begins here, in sweat, in dust, in patience. You blow gently on the surface, watching the flour lift in a tiny cloud, a miniature sandstorm in your courtyard. The donkeys outside shuffle to a halt as their keeper mutters and unties them. A thin layer of flour dust settles on everything, walls, hair, even the neighbor's cat, which sneezes indignantly and stalks away. You smile despite yourself. This is the unglamorous heart of Egypt's empire, quieter than battles, smaller than temples, yet just as necessary. You stretch your back, wipe your hands, and glance once more at the Nile's shimmer beyond the fields. It flows indifferent, steady, while you grind your handfuls of stubborn emmer into something that might just keep someone alive another day. You brush the flour dust from your lap and shift to a reed mat, where the real alchemy begins. The ground emmer and barley sit in shallow trays, waiting for their transformation. You fetch a clay jug from the Nile's edge, its surface still, sweating with river-cool moisture. The water has the faintest silt tang, hardly the crisp bottled stuff you dream of, but it's enough to coax life into the flour. You tip a little into the waiting bowl, the splash dampening the air, and stir with your hand until a sticky mud forms. The sour starter, that swampy jar of bubbling life you checked earlier, comes next. You scoop a dollop, stringy and pungent, into the mix. The smell hits first, sharp, tangy, like vinegar left in the sun. You wrinkle your nose, but smile anyway. This is Egypt's quiet miracle, invisible yeast colonies turning glop into sustenance. Historians still argue whether bakers back then noticed the difference between naturally leavened loaves and quick, flat griddle breads. But one truth is clear. Without this jar, bread would be nothing but flavorless paste. You knead with both hands now, pressing, folding, coaxing strands of gluten to tighten. It's heavy, clinging work. The dough sticks to your skin, tugging like a child unwilling to let go. You dust your palms with a little flour, but it's useless. Soon your fingers look like they're wearing mud gloves. A neighbor passes, chuckling, "Nice bracelets." And you mutter something about trading your sticky adornments for his unbaked figs. Salt goes in next, pinched from a small gritty pile. Sometimes you stir in honey or a trickle of date syrup if the order allows. For festival days, someone might even throw in coriander or sesame. Today, though, it's plain fare, just enough salt to keep the dough from tasting like bland porridge. You press, fold, twist again. The rhythm is hypnotic. Your shoulders rock, your arms ache, but your mind drifts with the steady push and pull. Once the dough gathers into a smooth mound, you cover it loosely with a damp cloth and let it rest. You wait for the air to do its work, bubbles lifting and stretching. It's the quietest part of the day, the dough puffing under its blanket, breathing in slow, invisible sighs. While it rests, you oil the clay molds, dipping a cloth into a dish of sesame oil, brushing each conical cavity until it gleams faintly. If you skip this step, good luck prying loaves loose later. You take a reed stylus and scratch tiny tally. Marks into a broken shard of pottery. Each batch gets a line. Bakers are not trusted to simply remember. No, someone will count later, and you don't want to argue with an overseer who has a reed switch handy. You press another line, the clay flaking slightly, and set the shard aside. These tally shards, called ostraca, are everywhere. Receipts, notes, sometimes even doodles. Imagine an entire empire built on recycled pottery fragments. The dough rises as you work, lifting like a slow balloon. You peek under the cloth, smile at the bubbles stretching its surface. It's alive, and that thought makes you oddly proud, even though this routine repeats daily. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest Egyptians used wild dates not just for sweetness, but to encourage fermentation, their skins coated with yeasts. It's like cheating at a science experiment, and you wonder how many bakers stumbled on the trick by accident, muttering, this one rose faster. You knead again, pressing out excess air, folding until it springs back. The surface grows smoother, more elastic. You roll pieces into balls, pat them into rough cylinders, and drops them into the waiting oiled molds. They fit snugly like eggs in nests. One by one, you line them up near the oven, ready to face the fire. The courtyard is brighter now, shadows shortening as the sun claims its throne. You wipe sweat from your temple, smearing a streak of flour across your cheek. The dough rests. Again, swelling within the molds. You glance at your tally shard, double-checking numbers, muttering under your breath like a nervous accountant. In this world, mistakes aren't shrugged off. They're written into ledgers, remembered, sometimes punished, and yet despite the pressure, there's a calm in this process. Sticky hands, quiet dough, tallies scratched in clay. It feels small, unremarkable, even boring. But you know this rhythm, grind, knead, rise, tally, is the heartbeat of Egypt. Soldiers, priests, pharaohs, they all eat from these molds. Without this sticky, stubborn dough, none of them move forward. You lean back against the courtyard wall, closing your eyes for a moment, listening to the faint popping of dough as bubbles rise. The world hums around you, but here, in this patch of shade, you let yourself breathe with the bread. The sun climbs, and with it the heat. You feel it gather on your shoulders like a heavy cloak as you step toward the ovens. These aren't neat little metal boxes with knobs. You face a clay dome oven, cracked from years of fire, and a series of tall cylindrical jars sunk into the ground. The smell of old ash clings to them like a second skin. You crouch, feeding reeds and dried dung into the mouth of the dome. The flame sputters at first, then roars awake, orange tongues licking the clay interior until it glows faintly. The air grows stifling. Sweat trickles down your back, salt stinging your eyes. You fan the flames with a woven mat, then step aside, coughing in the smoke. A neighbor shouts through the haze, "Don't burn your eyebrows this time." You wave him off with mock dignity, pretending you've never made that particular mistake. Truth is, most bakers walked around with singed forearms and missing arm hair, a badge of the trade, if you will. You begin sliding the molds closer. The dough inside has puffed, straining against the clay walls. With a practiced rhythm, you angle each one, nestling it into the heated sand beside the jars. The dome oven gets the first load, and you brace a flat reed shield as you lean in to set them against the curved wall. A wave of heat blasts out, forcing you to blink tears away. You pull back quickly, shielding your hands with damp cloths. One slip and your loaf is charcoal. Historians still argue whether these early ovens produced bread evenly or left bakers forever battling scorched edges. Judging by your singed fingertips and the occasional acrid whiff of burning, you'd lean toward the second theory. Still, practice teaches tricks. Rotate the molds often, cover with reeds to trap steam, even sprinkle a little sand to buffer hot spots. Not perfect, but close enough for rations. You crouch nearby, listening. The crackle of reeds, the hiss of moisture evaporating, the faint puffing sound as bubbles expand. The whole courtyard is alive with fire and breath. A small loaf edges too close to the coals, and you lunge with tongs to rescue it, brushing chars off with damp reeds. Crisis averted, you mutter to yourself, "Smoky bread, totally intentional," and chuckle. The cat, sprawled in the shade, flicks an ear as if unimpressed with your culinary wit. An overseer strides in, arms crossed, eyes sharp. He counts the molds lined by the oven, lips moving silently as his finger tracks along. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. You know the tally shard doesn't lie, but overseers love catching mistakes. He pauses at one batch, frowns, then moves on without comment. You exhale slowly. Bread isn't just food, it's wages, offerings, taxes. Missing loaves mean trouble. Still, you sneak in one indulgence. At the edge of the oven, you slide a tray of oddly shaped festival loaves, stars, birds, little fish. These aren't part of the quota, they're for the coming feast. A sly grin tugs your lips as you angle them in. If anyone asks, you'll swear they were practice shapes for the temple. Half-truths are another baker's survival tool. The heat thickens, pressing against your lungs. You back away, arms red, hands trembling slightly from the strain of turning. Molds again and again. You think of the Nile, its cool water a few fields away, and promise yourself a plunge once the quotas are met. The loaves begin to set, crusts hardening, surfaces splitting into pale ridges. You tap one gently, it thuds with a hollow note. Another few minutes, and they'll be ready. You kneel, sliding them out with tongs, one by one, setting them on reed mats to cool. The air fills with the nutty, slightly sour scent of fresh bread. For a moment, all the aches, the heat, the soot in your throat, it feels worth it. You stand amid steaming loaves, shoulders aching, eyes stinging, but chest light. This batch will feed workers, priests, maybe even scribes, scribbling taxes in dim chambers. Each loaf, born from your sweat, travels further than you do. You smirk at the thought. Emperors conquer, priests pray, but only you can keep them from fainting at noon. You wipe your hands on your tunic, leaving streaks of flour and ash across the fabric, and start sorting the loaves. Some are set aside for temple offerings, their shape simple, but made with careful precision, because the gods are apparently picky about symmetry. You line them neatly, stacking them in reed baskets that creak under the weight. Each one will soon rest on altars, surrounded by incense and chants. You shake your head a little. Bread is bread, but once it's touched, by ritual, it suddenly becomes divine. Next, you arrange the ration loaves. These are sturdier, less pretty, baked quickly, and stacked high. They'll go straight to workers, carried out to dusty fields and quarry sites. You imagine a mason biting into one at midday, brushing sand from his teeth, with the same sigh you made while grinding grain this morning. Practical bread, eaten without ceremony, but as necessary as air. Without it, no wall rises, no pyramid stands. You sling a basket over your shoulder, balancing another against your hip. The path to the market is already buzzing. Vendors shout about onions and garlic, fishermen wave freshly caught tilapia, and beer brewers guard jars, frothing with barley brew. You add your own voice to the din, calling out loaves as you pass, though your throat is dry from smoke. Someone barters 2 onions for a small round. Another offers a jug of beer for a basketful. You agree to both. Bread for beer, beer for bread. It's the eternal cycle. The street narrows as you weave through, sidestepping goats and the occasional potter hauling his wares. Dust clings to your ankles, rising in soft clouds with each step. You pass a group of women pounding flax, their rhythmic thuds echoing the grind of your morning quern. They nod, and one calls, "Save us a sweet loaf next time." You grin, promising, though you know sweets are rare luxuries. You pause at a shaded stall, trading. A bundle of loaves for onions stacked high. The vendor slips you a sprig of coriander as a bonus. It smells sharp, green, refreshing against the flour dust on your skin. You tuck it behind your ear with mock pride, drawing a laugh from a passing brewer. Humor makes the errands lighter. The sun climbs higher, and shade becomes a prize. You stop beneath a palm awning, shifting the baskets to ease your shoulders. A boy runs past with sticky hands from stolen honey, chased by a vendor who's laughing too hard to be truly angry. The smell of roasting fish mingles with the sharp tang of donkey dung, the sweet maltiness of beer, and the nutty warmth still clinging to your own bread. The market is alive, chaotic, messy, and you're a part of its pulse. Historians still argue whether markets like these were fully free-for-all exchanges or tightly monitored by officials. Judging by the watchful eyes of the tax collector seated in the corner, stylus scratching across a clay tablet, you'd bet on the second. You make sure your trades are subtle enough to look casual, yet clear enough to keep yourself out of trouble. Bread is currency, but too much unrecorded barter raises eyebrows. By midday, your baskets are nearly empty, replaced with onions, beer, and the gossip of the market. Rumors swirl as easily as dust. A noble's feast planned by the riverbank, a priest arguing over barley tithes, a fisherman claiming the Nile's spirits are restless this season. You nod, half listening, knowing most of it will fade like smoke, but some tidbit might reach your oven tomorrow in the form of extra orders or withheld rations. You turn back toward home, shoulders lighter now, the path shimmering in the heat. The Nile flashes silver between the fields, reminding you it's the true source of all this bustle. Without its floods, no grain, no bread, no markets, no empire. The thought hums quietly in your mind as you step off the noisy street, back toward awe, the quieter rhythm of your own courtyard. Back in the courtyard, the frenzy of the market still echoes faintly in your ears, but here the air feels calmer, slower. The ovens smolder low, their bellies glowing faintly with dying embers. You set down your baskets, now full of onions and a jug of beer instead of bread, and stretch your aching shoulders. The loaves that remain are a humble stack, just enough for your own household and tomorrow's starter. You brush ash from your hands and prepare for the quiet work of closing the day. First comes the ledger, not a leather-bound book, but a broken shard of pottery smeared with tally marks. You sit cross-legged and count the leftover loaves one by one, scratching lines into the clay with a reed. Each mark matters, whether for ration checks, temple accounts, or just proof that you did not skim off the quota. It feels tedious, but you know that missing numbers turn into sharp questions later. You sigh and add a final mark, setting the shard on a shelf among dozens of others, all whispering the arithmetic of survival. You take one loaf and crumble a piece into a bowl. This isn't waste, it's tomorrow's insurance. The dry crumbs, mixed with a splash of water, will carry the sour tang of life forward, ensuring the leaven jar wakes again at dawn. A cycle unbroken, day after day, loaf after loaf. You smile faintly, thinking of it as a quiet handshake with the past and future. The courtyard darkens as the sun slips behind palm groves. Children chase each other in the lanes, laughter mingling with the bleat of goats returning to pens. The ovens crackle softly, cooling. You kneel and dab a smear of salve onto a blister on your palm, the sting fading into a dull throb. Small burns, small aches. They're badges you don't boast about, but accept as part of the trade. Dinner is simple. A loaf split open, dipped into beer, paired with onion. You chew slowly, the sour tang filling your mouth, the crust still faintly warm. You lean against the doorframe, watching stars prick the sky one by one. The air cools, carrying the faint rustle of reeds and the endless murmur of the Nile. For once you feel the weight of silence more than the weight of clay or dough. A quirky detail surfaces in your tired mind. Some Egyptians carved little bread, loaves on tomb walls, eternal rations for the afterlife. You chuckle softly. Imagine spending eternity kneading sticky dough. Maybe the gods had a sense of humor after all. Historians still argue whether bakers were respected craftsmen or looked down on as mere laborers. Standing here, with flour on your skin, smoke in your hair, and the quiet satisfaction of feeding an entire street, you think the answer is probably both. Respect doesn't always come from titles. It comes from bellies filled. The embers fade. The tally shard rests, and tomorrow's dough waits only in potential. You breathe deeply, the night pressing gently around you, and let your muscles loosen in the cool hush of Egypt's endless cycle. And now, as the stars scatter more thickly across the desert sky, you let the pace of the day unravel into something slower, softer. The ovens that once roared with heat are only hushed shells, breathing out the last warmth like a sigh. You sit quietly by their side, feeling the ground beneath you cool, feeling the faint breeze stroke past your cheek. The Nile itself seems to slow its song, the water slipping past reeds with a lull so steady it almost feels like a heartbeat. You picture the baskets emptied, the molds stacked neatly, the tools laid down. Every sound grows rounder, quieter, the more distant clop of a donkey fading, the soft murmur of neighbors settling in their own courtyards, the rustle of palm leaves brushing one another in the night air. The world that was once dust and heat and motion becomes still, almost tender. And you, baker of Egypt, sink into that stillness. You let your arms rest, no longer kneading, no longer turning stone upon stone. You let your breath slow, matching the gentle rhythm of the river and the hush of the cooling clay. Each inhale carries the faint sweetness of grain. Each exhale releases the weight of labor, of quotas, of tallies, scratched on clay shards. The stars brighten, steady and patient. The village exhales with you, its countless small fires dimming into embers. You close your eyes and imagine the awe, taste of tomorrow's bread already forming, warm and sour, carried forward by the leaven you tended so carefully. Nothing urgent now, nothing harsh, just the drift of time, the comfort of rhythm, the quiet cycle that never ends.